Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 123 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, John Vowells. I've got Joe Meade with me, and tonight we've got a Big Ten basketball update, some results. We're starting to see some identities form. It's been a little bit since we did our preview. We're going to go over a couple games, a couple of narratives that are forming over the past week or so. And Joe, let's start with the team that was the preseason number one overall team. That is Purdue. They didn't look great in their first two games without Trey Kaufman-Renn. They end up surrendering that number one spot despite not losing a game, but they get it right back. A huge 87-80 victory over Alabama in Tuscaloosa. I think any initial worries about Purdue seem to have gone away rather quickly.
Yeah, I mean that's how you do it. I think Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman-Renn are right back to the form they were when Purdue was at its apex from December to the middle of February last season. So that's going to be very encouraging for Boilermaker fans to see. Also, you're getting contributions off the bench. Daniel Jacobson, I think he's going to be really good next year, but I think he's going to come into his own this year as the kind of de facto big man, whether that's him relieving an Oscar Clough or a TKR should one of them get in foul trouble or injury issues, which TKR has struggled with in the past. Um, you know, Pretty hard to critique much about Purdue here. I thought it was a pretty balanced effort. Now, you probably want a little more from Fletcher Lawyer, 1 of 4 from three. I'd probably try to get him two or three more 3-point attempts. But when Braden Smith is on like this and, you know, shooting 50% from the arc, that's probably just a micro criticism I could have for a number one team in the country. I thought they did a really good job as well. Um, Rebounding the ball. I think they out rebounded Alabama by like plus 20 or I think plus 24 is 52-28. So Purdue's doing all the things that you expect them to do as a contender. And to see them doing that early with an experienced lineup and then some of the young guys like Daniel Jacobson coming into their own, I think that's really encouraging for the Boilermakers.
Yeah, it really is. And the rebounding is the biggest takeaway for me. That was supposed to be sort of a weakness for this team, and it was early on. Not at all here. And Alabama is a team that doesn't really have a five. They play a very unique style. They took 44 three-pointers to just 22 twos. But Purdue sort of led the entire way here. Um, I think Alabama pulled back to a couple points a few times, but this was a really good win from Purdue. They are continuing to score it at a high rate. You get pretty good performances from all the role players. We don't need double digits. Purdue doesn't need double digits from these role players. They just need 7, 8, 9 points, a couple rebounds, to get the job done. They're not going to be taking enough shots to really average more than that. I mean, it's going to be 40 to 45 a game from Braden and TKR, and if you want to go 60 with Fletch, if you get to 60 with your top three, like, how many more points? You need 20 points from the other six players. So that seems to be the formula for Purdue this year. And while Lawyer only had 7, you've still got probably the best win in the country right now. You'd have to think.
Oh,
Alabama,
easily, yeah.
Alabama, had that nice win at St. John's, and analytically, they, some of the preseason notions haven't really shook out yet. So Alabama's not quite as high as they are in the AP poll. They're around 20 in the computers, but still a really good win for Purdue. They end up beating Akron Sunday night as well. Akron's a really solid team. They're 83rd in KenPom. So you see that 18-point victory, and you may not be that impressed, but they were only 16-point favorites, so they did end up actually covering, at least from the computer's point of view there. They go to Baha Mar up next, where they face Memphis, who just lost to their old coach Josh Pastner on their home floor. So you'd like to think Purdue takes care of business there, and then I believe the team that they play in the championship will be a good one too. So another opportunity for a big win, and then they still have a bunch of other good ones on the schedule too. But I think a minor issue for Purdue seems to have already been rectified. All right, Joe. Well, that was Thursday's big game. And there were a few other big games over the weekend. Let's go back to Friday. There were a couple games, including Big Ten teams Iowa picked up a nice 81-62 victory over Richard Pitino and Xavier. This is a Xavier team that might be the worst power conference team in the country, so good on Iowa there. And their formula seems to be working so far. They play incredibly slow. They're 359 in tempo, but despite that, they are a top 20 offense. So it seems that the Ben McCollum and Bennett Sturts formula is working so far.
Yeah, and I think they're getting solid contributions for the bench as well. I think, Bennett Sturts being there is probably the X factor, Sean. He's not a guy that can be out for very long in the game, and he's not a guy that can be out at all during the season. I believe he played the entirety of this game as well, kind of dictating that offense, and he's done a great job in their initial 3 games so far. Do I think that's the key to long-term success? Like I said, Sean, I predicted them to be in the NCAA tournament, or at least very least on the bubble most of the year. I know you pushed back a little on it, but
Yeah,
I just think I think Coach McCollum is the closest thing to not stylistically to Kurt Cignetti in Big Ten basketball. The guy is a really good coach. He has a really good record and has a unique style and mojo to him. I just think this is going to work out somehow, some way.
it seems to me that Iowa is going to be sort of similar to Indiana football in the way that when they're the better team, they're gonna win by a lot. And I don't know, what that level is, but it it screams bubble team to me so far, Joe. How is this going to work against their first Big Ten game is at the Breslin Center? How is it going to work there? They still have to go away in the Cyhawk game. Like they have a really tough run here. They play Ole Miss in a neutral. Is that an MTE? Maybe it's
I
California.
believe so.
I
Yeah.
believe it's a four-teamer in California, so they'll get another big game there. Um, it seems to be working against lesser competition. Now, that is a formula that can get you to the NCAA tournament. If you win 20 games, you have good computer numbers, one or two big wins, that's there. But their role. I think their role players are actually going to be the X factor. I think Sturts is going to be really good. There are going to be games where somebody else has to step up, and I don't know in the Big Ten if that works, but I think that they are probably going to be right there on the bubble. That seems to be my takeaway so far. All right, Joe, we had a couple other games Friday night. One of them was including your Michigan Wolverines. And another narrow victory. Michigan goes to TCU, wins 67-63. A game that really could have gone either way. And it seems like sort of the exact same game happened against Wake Forest, and Michigan ends up just on top. But a little bit worrying, but also they shut the door and got the win.
Yeah, Dusty May, I think what a lot of people overlooked is the first season, they won a lot of the close games in the conference. Prior to that, they lost like 3 really close games to Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Wake Forest, funnily enough. And they really could have lost to TCU last year as well. The reason I'm saying that is they're closing the door on these games, like you've been saying, Sean. I don't think they've played particularly well. I think something we touched on and I think Dusty touched on it today at his press conference was that three big lineup. It's not reliable to just pass out of doubles, whether it's a Merez, a Daimara, or a Yaxel. I think they have to get Yaxel in space, like Dusty was saying. I think what he does well is the post ups and the one-on-one down low. I think he is a better shooter than he's letting on to be, and probably wants to take more than 2 3-pointers a game. Might want to take four. Um, but this is a team, Sean, that if they're not shooting themselves out of the game, they're going to find ways to win. You saw that in the second half here. They kind of trailed by like, 4-6 in a lot of this game, kind of narrowed it down. And this is a team that gets rebounds when they have to, whether that's a Merez Johnson, a Yaxel Lendeborg. Um, the one bigger concern to me isn't the talent. I don't think you would dispute that, or even the biggest Michigan hater. It's the turnovers. Can Elliot Cadeau be a consistent general of the offense? Because LJ Kaysen as a backup is definitely not going to become a starter this year. Trey McKinney might be a solution at point guard as well, but right now the biggest question: can they limit the turnovers? Something that was probably their biggest issue last year.
I said it before, and I think it seems a lot like last year's Indiana team in terms of fit. Like they are better when they're not better when those three bigs are on the floor. Yaxel's best when he's at the four. Merez is best when he's at the five, and Mara's best when he's at the five. Now that obviously means that all three of them can't be on the floor for extended periods together. But I think they are a team that's built to play close games, unlike Indiana in past years. I think to my knowledge, they've made some free throws this year, Joe. 76%. The turnovers are a little bit of an issue, but I think you trust Michigan in close games now. They've shut the door in both of these games, both of them not at home too. But on the flip side, they probably should have stretched it out and beaten these teams pretty solidly. And I guess there are some things that you can work on in some bye games, Joe. But you have Middle Tennessee up next, and then Players Era, Big Ten play sandwiched around a Villanova game. You don't have another. You have one bye game until December 21st. So perhaps this is not the best schedule for the way that things are turning out. But on the other hand,
That TCU win could age
yeah,
well. It could be quad one.
but
Yeah,
TCU did also lose to New Orleans at home
they did.
to start their season. So I think there's probably a better chance that Wake gets to 50 and is quad one than TCU away. But in terms of Players Era, you have San Diego State and Auburn, who, like, at the worst, I think Michigan could keep it close against them, and you'd have to trust them in close games. So
Yeah.
I think it might be just hard to kill off this Michigan team, and they just win a ton of close games, and they probably don't blow out a couple of their inferior opponents like they should, but they did still score 121 against Oakland. So I think we start looking at a little more matchup based things, see what more fit we can get, and they really don't have a lot of time to figure it out, Joe, because they're going to Las Vegas in a week. Well, they'll
Yeah.
play definitely two quad one games, maybe a third. And then from there, Big Ten play Villanova. Like, it's, I guess they're winning, but they're going to have to play better than they did in these last two games to come out of Vegas with 2 wins. But on the other hand, like, they're getting sort of they're getting a ton of people involved.
Yeah.
And, do they have a star? Doesn't look like it, but on the other hand, maybe that is a good thing. All right, Joe. Other games on Friday we can touch on closely. Northwestern picked up an away win against DePaul. That was very important because DePaul's already dropped a bye game to Buffalo. Nick Martinelli appears to be an all-conference player. And then Washington picks up a big win over their rivals at Washington State. We finally get a pretty good performance from Washington. Wesley Yates, Heinz Steinbach. They're still down a few players. But the biggest one, Joe, unless you want to get either of those teams, was UCLA. We talked about UCLA. They sort of did the thing where they're not really looking great against bye-game opponents. Some of them are close games. Big step up for them against Arizona at the Intuit Dome, which is where the Clippers play. And Arizona ended up winning, but UCLA went punch for punch with them. I think obviously disappointing that they lost that, but pretty good performance from the Bruins.
Yeah, I thought it was very encouraging. You never want to lose that game, especially if Mick Cronin's your coach. But I think this team is balanced in the starting lineup. I think their downfall is going to be the depth off the bench. I don't really think they have what they did last year in a reliable option there. I think Donovan Dent is probably going to play a lot better than he did, and is like this is pretty much him getting his feet wet again because he was coming back from injury. I think if they play this game 2 weeks later, I think UCLA wins. I think Donovan Dent takes over. I think what they're doing with Tyler Bilodeau and Xavier Booker is somehow working out. I was skeptical at first, but I think their efficiency down low is a lot better. It's opened up some opportunities in the 3-point game as well. Um, don't think they'll be shooting over 50% like they did in this game again, so kind of a shame to waste that. But this is a team that has a few more ways to beat you with their starting lineup than last year. I just think they have to find one or two guys off the bench to spot one of these starters when they are playing bad, because you're not going to have a game where all of them have over 9 points again.
And to me, I think it's sort of like the same UCLA product that we've seen over the years. right? They're going to be able to, if they can make it ugly, they're going to be able to compete with anybody. Arizona, like, might be the their fifth. They might be the best team in the country, and UCLA went shot for shot for them, and then down the stretch, offense got a little stagnant. They didn't execute. How many times have we heard that with Mick Cronin's teams? And they have somebody who can play hero ball and Dent, so they might be able to sneak a couple of these wins this year. But it seemed like Arizona was sort of daring somebody else to do something, and it didn't really happen. And Arizona is just closed the game like 38 minutes. This was a dead even game, and like you said, the Bilodeau Booker thing seems to be working. They're both sort of playing the four. They're moving. They're facing up. They're finishing inside. They're hitting mid ranges. They're hitting threes. 5 threes between the two of them. But just 3 bench points, Joe, is a little bit alarming. That's what they're going to have to look at here in some of their bye games. Is can you get some other players involved? You do have 2 bye games before the Empire Classic, where they'll play Cal and somebody else, I believe, before Big Ten play starts for them. It's Washington and Oregon before they go up to play Gonzaga and Seattle. So, this tends to be, with the way that the Big Ten schedule is, put together, is that Feast Week to that double Big Ten set in the beginning of December. You'll probably throw some meaningful non-con games in there, and then maybe back to a few bye games before Big Ten play starts again. So now that we're starting to see teams 3 and 4 times, it's time to step it up a little bit. And for UCLA, they really almost did here. And while you can be pretty happy about the performance, they did let a huge opportunity slide for a really, really good win.
Yeah.
All right, Joe, we had 2 games on Saturday I want to get to real quick. We got
Yep.
Maryland picking up a road win against Marquette. Maryland down a few players, Marquette not the same, but this was a win for the conference that I really wasn't expecting.
No, and huge credit to Buzz Williams. I did not think Maryland would look this quality early on, especially after they dropped that early game to Georgetown. I think the overwhelming storyline of this one, unfortunately, is going to be the injury to Pharrell Payne, this vile injury. I don't think he will be back probably anytime soon. Is that overestimating
Yeah,
Sean?
it looked bad, and yeah, I haven't seen an update.
Yeah, I think what you really like though from Maryland is Darius Adams. I think he was probably one of the more underrated recruits in the country. Only a 4-star originally, like back and forth between like Michigan State, UConn, or um, whatever it was. But um, I like David. I like David Coit. I think he's coming out. I think it's the right combo of transfers to the starting lineup. I don't necessarily think that you're going to get Isaiah Watts contributing 18 a night, but if they can find like 3 guys to score over 15 a night, this team could have something. This team's going to play hard, and they're going to have to probably play even harder with the injury to Pharrell Payne, who I think is one of the more like energy guys in the conference and in the country, certainly. So, um, definitely a huge blow for the Terrapins, but a huge win for their resume, should that matter come March.
Yeah, and Marquette is a team that has gotten thoroughly outplayed on a neutral by what is probably a middle of the pack Big Ten team, and then outplayed on their home floor by a team Maryland that is probably below the middle of the pack. So, look, as an Indiana fan, I'm rooting for Marquette here the rest of the year. But to me, like now watching them twice, I think that they've taken a serious step back, and whether they still might be the 4th or 5th best team in the Big East, but with it being neutral in a way, there's still a chance for these to be big wins for this team. And Joe, Maryland was missing Miles Rice, their starting point guard, and they're still able to get a road win over a decent team. So a lot to like here. I think just it's sort of the Buzz Williams story here. If you've been watching Texas A&M over the past few years, we have great defensive teams. They rebound a ton of their misses. and they sort of need a superstar to carry them offensively from that bubble team 9-10 seed range up. They had Wade Taylor, who did that a few times. Don't know if they have that here, but maybe they can just guard their way to the tournament. Buzz has done that before. All right, the last game that we're going to talk about here, Joe, is Nebraska. 4-0 to start the year under Fred Hoiberg. They pick up a home win, 105-99 against Porter Moser in Oklahoma. Price Sanford 28 points. Rink Mast adds 26. Burke Tunsil 16. Jamarcus Lawrence 14. This Nebraska starting lineup is pretty well constructed, and they're scoring a lot of points.
Yeah, and I think they shot like 15 to 27 from three as well. This is a team that could shoot. Price Sanford, if you know anything about that family, certainly a guy could shoot it out of the gym. Um, what I really like in this one is you look at Oklahoma's stat line and you figure, they're 14 to 37 from three. They're probably blowing Nebraska out. Nebraska is a team that not necessarily known for being physical. It was just a straight tie in the rebound category. I don't think this is a sustainable way to win. Allowing your opponent to get, that wide open from three and to make a decent amount of them. But if you're going to have shooting nights like this, it indicates to me Nebraska is going to be an extremely annoying out at Pinnacle Bank Arena, something that's been a theme in this conference for a while, even with Tim Miles. So, you know, I look at this team. This is a team that can definitely score. It's just can they defend? It's kind of a similar theme to what we saw last year with Nebraska. I really think that Nebraska, if they could find a way to just be plus in the rebound category or not have a huge discrepancy, this is a team that can maybe get to 18, 19 wins and sniff the bubble. I do think there's a few more questions about them, but what are your thoughts, Sean?
Yeah, depth is a real problem for them, and for us to be saying that pretty convincingly here in the middle of November, not the best sign. Um, I I think 3, 4, 5, like they're pretty set. Like Sanford and the two bigs, that's working. They're scoring, um, but they have 13 bench points here. Jacobson 10, Esigian with 3. Um, Esigian's going to be a guy who's going to be streaky. He's going to have, he had 12, 13, 0, and 3 this year. I mean, that's the Connor Esigian experience. He's going to pop up for 17 one night, and then he might score 2 the next time. Honestly, not the worst formula for a bench player. And then Jacobson adds 10 off the bench at 6'4". Guards, the guards are an issue here for Nebraska. I think, Hoiberg's like a solid role player. You have Jamarcus Lawrence, who they sent away to Rhode Island before he came back. I think their guard play might just limit them a little bit, especially in a league which it appears is going to have a lot of teams that score a lot with a lot of possessions. So I think probably for me, they're on the out right now, outside of the bubble, but it could go either way. I mean, forwards have carried teams in this league over the past few years. But we'll see if that is the best strategy for them. Hold on, the Zoom did freeze on us. All right, we're back. But Joe, we have a couple of big games this week in the Big Ten. Let's end this off with one that you're looking forward to.
Yeah, probably the easy one is Michigan State versus Kentucky. And hopefully you're listening to this either, you know, probably Tuesday or, maybe right after. So, to pick up one later on as well, Sean, Alabama, Illinois. We're going to see kind of Alabama's played similar teams now with Purdue. So I'm really interested to see how Illinois stacks up with the Purdue. I think they've not got into the top 10 unmistakably. I think that was a good vote. I think Illinois, aside from Purdue, is the most impressive team so far.
Yep, they have probably the second best win in the conference right now with their win over Texas Tech. And, they have another chance for a huge home win. And, there are some questions about whether you got to be top 25 in the analytics for home wins to count as Q1. Alabama and Texas Tech are going to be top 25. Like, I don't think Illinois has to worry about those games falling out of Q1. So, we'll end it there, Joe. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.